Hello, this time we will be discussing about animal reproduction. Some animals produce offspring through asexual reproduction while other animals produce offspring through sexual reproduction. Both methods have advantages and disadvantages. Asexual reproduction produces offspring that are genetically identical to the parent because the offspring are all clones of the original parent. A single individual can produce offspring asexually and large numbers of offspring can be produced quickly. These are two advantages that asexually reproducing organisms have over sexually reproducing organisms. In a stable or predictable environment, asexual reproduction is an effective means of reproduction because all the offspring will be adapted to that environment. In an unstable or unpredictable environment, species that reproduce asexually may be at a disadvantage because all the offspring are genetically identical and may not be adapted to different conditions. During sexual reproduction, the genetic material of two individuals is combined to produce genetically diverse offspring that differ from their parents. The genetic diversity of sexually produced offspring is thought to give sexually reproducing individuals greater fitness because more of their offspring may survive and reproduce in an unpredictable or changing environment. Species that reproduce sexually and have separate sexes must maintain two different types of individuals, males and females. Only half the population, the females, can produce the offspring, so fewer offspring will be produced when compared to asexual reproduction. This is a disadvantage of sexual reproduction compared to asexual reproduction. So at the end of this discussion, you will be able to 1. Identify the different ways on how animals reproduce. 2. Differentiate sexual reproduction from asexual reproduction. 3. Cite the advantages and disadvantages of both types of reproduction. Reproduction. Reproduction, or procreation or breeding, is the biological process by which new individual organisms called the offspring are produced from their parents. Reproduction is a fundamental feature of all known life. Each individual organism exists as the result of reproduction. There are two forms of reproduction, asexual and sexual. Sexual reproduction is the process of joining the haploid gametes, sex cells, to form a diploid cell called a zygote. A zygote eventually becomes an embryo and later on develop into an organism. The female gamete is an egg cell, is usually non-motile, to ensure survival of the embryo by storing energy. The male gamete is a sperm cell, which is motile to search for the egg cell for fertilization. This process is usually slow and complex compared to asexual reproduction. The organisms so produced are genetically diverse. Thus, they can evolve along with the changing climatic conditions. Humans and many multicellular organisms exhibit a sexual mode of reproduction. Sexual reproduction always involves fertilization. It is the fusion of gametes, the sperm cell and egg cell. Fertilization may occur internally and externally. In external fertilization, the fusion of gametes takes place outside the body of an organism. For example, the female fish lays eggs while the male fish waits to spread sperm over the eggs. While in internal fertilization, the eggs are fertilized inside the body of a female organism. Here are some terms that you need to know about sexual reproduction. Sex determination is a mechanism by which the sex of individuals in sexually reproducing organisms is initially established. The female has 2 X chromosomes and male has 1 X chromosome and 1 Y chromosome. Hermaphroditism. It is the state of having both female and male reproductive structures within the same individual. Sex versus gender. Sex is biological. It is defined by the chromosomes, reproductive organs, and genitalia and hormones. While gender is culturally defined or stereotyped. For example, females are considered to be in caregiving and services jobs. They are fragile, emotional, and inferior to men and financially dependent. Males should be in construction and defense jobs. They are risk-takers and aggressive. They have high participation in the workforce and they are expected to be financially independent. With regards to the types of sexual reproduction, there are three types: the oviparity, viviparity, and ovoviviparity. Oviparity is a process by which fertilized eggs are laid outside the female's body and develop there. It receives nourishment from the yolk, which is part of the egg. The eggs may have been fertilized before release, as in birds and some reptiles, or are to be fertilized externally, as in amphibians and many lower forms. In general, the number of eggs produced by oviparous species greatly exceeds the number of offspring from species that bear live young, but the chances of survival are diminished because of the lack of maternal protection. Viviparity. It is a process by which the young develop within the female and are born in a non-embryonic stage. The growing embryo derives continuous nourishment from the mother, usually through a placenta or similar structure. This is the case in most mammals, many reptiles, and a few lower organisms. Ovoviviparity. It is a process by which fertilized eggs are retained within the female. A more primitive condition, known as ovoviviparity and found in certain snakes, is the simple retention of the egg until it hatches. In this case, the embryo derives food from the yolk present in the egg and is not dependent on the mother except for physical protection. Another type of reproduction is asexual reproduction. In asexual reproduction, fusion of the egg cell and sperm cell does not occur. Reproduction is mainly through mitosis, which creates a clone of the parent. The organisms produced by asexual reproduction are less diverse in nature. This type of reproduction is practiced widely by unicellular organisms. There are several types of asexual reproduction that will be discussed in this video. The binary fission, budding, spore formation, fragmentation, and vegetative reproduction. The binary fission occurs in a single parent cell divides into two daughter cells. This happens in amoeba, paramecium, bacteria. The bacterial chromosome is attached to the plasma membrane at about the midpoint of the cell. The starting point of replication, the origin, is close to the binding site of the chromosome to the plasma membrane. Replication of the DNA is bidirectional, moving away from the origin on both strands of the loop simultaneously. As the new double strands are formed, each origin point moves away from the cell wall attachment toward the opposite ends of the cell. As the cell elongates, the growing membrane aids in the transport of the chromosomes. After the chromosomes have cleared the midpoint of the elongated cell, cytoplasmic separation begins. The formation of a ring composed of repeating units of a protein directs the partition between the nucleoids. Formation of the FTSC ring triggers the accumulation of other proteins that work together to recruit new membrane and cell wall materials to the site. A septum is formed between the nucleoids, extending gradually from the periphery toward the center of the cell. When the new cell walls are in place, the daughter cells separate. Budding. Parent cell produces bud. It gets detached and develops into a new individual. It happens in yeast and hydra. This is how hydra reproduce. The common asexual method of reproduction by hydras is budding. Buds originate at the junction of the stalk and gastric regions. The bud begins as a hemispherical outpouching that eventually elongates, becomes cylindrical, and develops tentacles. The bud then pinches off and a new individual becomes independent. Spore formation occurs by forming spores. Under favorable conditions, spores develop into new individual. This happens in ferns, fungi, and bacteria. Almost all fungi reproduce asexually by producing spores. A fungal spore is a haploid cell produced by mitosis from a haploid parent cell. It is genetically identical to the parent cell. Fungal spores can develop into new haploid individuals without being fertilized. Fragmentation. Organisms with filamentous body break into two or more fragments. Each fragment grows into a new individual. This happens in Spirogyra. Typically, hydras will reproduce by just budding off a whole new individual. The bud will occur around 2/3 of the way down the body axis. But when a hydra is cut in half, each half will regenerate and form into a small hydra. That head will regenerate a foot and the foot will regenerate a head. Another type of asexual reproduction is vegetative reproduction. The organism produces new individuals by a vegetative part of the plant. This happens in potato, onion, ginger, and mint. For plants such as onions, garlic, tulip, daffodil, and hyacinth, the bulb is the unit of vegetative propagation. The stem is shortened down to a disc, often called the basal plate, from which roots arise around the edge. The leaf bases are attached to the upper surface of the stem. Another example are potatoes. Potatoes are mainly propagated by vegetative methods like cloning. Potato tubers have nodes or eyes from which the new growth begins. The new stems growing from each eye are called sprouts, which give rise to the new plant. Vegetative seed can be either a whole tuber or a cut tuber. In addition to the discussed asexual reproduction types, parthenogenesis can be added to the list. It is a form of asexual reproduction in which an egg develops into a complete individual without being fertilized. It is also referred to by many as virgin birth. Parthenogenesis takes place in both asexual animals and plants. In animals, the embryo develops from an unfertilized egg. In plants, it is a part of the process, apomixis. Parthenogenesis occurs in many types of invertebrates including scorpions, nematodes, mites, water fleas, wasps, some bees, and other insects. Parthenogenesis may occur in some vertebrate animals as well, such as amphibians, some fish, reptiles, and in few bird species. Parthenogenesis has been observed in some types of sharks, such as the blacktip shark, the bonnet-head shark, and the zebra shark. The zebra shark can alternate between sexual and asexual reproduction by parthenogenesis. They go for asexual especially in the absence of a potential mate. Several species of insects can reproduce asexually by parthenogenesis, including honeybees and ants. Another example of a parthenogenetic invertebrate is the water fleas, Daphnia of order Cladocera. The water fleas are not insects but small crustaceans. They reproduce through parthenogenesis with an adjunct sexual reproduction, mostly depending on the environmental conditions. They reproduce sexually by producing resting eggs that may survive harsh conditions. But in favorable conditions, they reproduce asexually, producing female clones. When the conditions become less favorable, they asexually reproduce male offspring to mate with the females, and so sexual reproduction can occur. Types of parthenogenesis. Parthenogenesis is commonly typified as either automixous parthenogenesis or apomixous parthenogenesis. In automixous parthenogenesis, the egg cell fuses with the polar body to produce an embryo. This merge can shift the genes of the mother to produce new alleles, so the offspring is similar to the mother but not a full clone. The produced organism gets two X chromosomes from the mother. Therefore, automixous parthenogenesis produces female offspring only. Rarely, fertile males can be produced having only one X chromosome. These are fertile because their sperm cells contain the X chromosome only. In apomixous parthenogenesis, the egg cells do not undergo meiotic division, so when an egg cell divides, it is a replicate of the original cell in terms of the genes present. Therefore, the offspring will be a full clone of the mother. This form is most commonly found in plants. This type of parthenogenesis produces identical offspring which are genetically similar to the parent. The egg cells are haploid cells produced from ovaries by meiosis. A precursor cell after meiosis produces an ovum and three polar bodies or small byproducts of meiotic division. In sexual reproduction, the polar bodies eventually degenerate. That's what happens in human egg cells following meiosis. But for other organisms, the ovum may fuse with the polar body, such as in the case of automixous parthenogenesis, also called meiotic parthenogenesis, described in the previous section. The egg fuses with the second polar body. Thus, although there is no sperm cell involved in increasing gene diversity, this form of parthenogenesis offers a degree of genetic variation among offspring. Typically, the egg cell after meiosis is haploid, meaning it contains half the number of chromosomes of the original cell. In parthenogenesis, the offspring may be diploid or haploid depending on the mechanism of parthenogenesis. Based on the fate of the offspring, the condition may be described as arenotechous, when an unfertilized egg develops parthenogenetically into a male. Thelyticous, when an unfertilized egg develops into a female. Deuterotechous, when an unfertilized egg is capable of developing into either a male or a female. If we compare sexual reproduction to asexual reproduction, here are the similarities. They both produce offspring. Has at least one parent. Both pass DNA down to the offspring. The offspring has complete set of DNA. And they both continue species. Their differences are also provided for you. Both type of reproduction has its advantages and disadvantages. In sexual reproduction, the advantages are 1. It can adapt easier to environment changes. 2. It increases genetic variations. 3. Allows for diversity and evolution of the species. On the other hand, its disadvantages are 1. Takes longer to reproduce offsprings. 2. more things can go wrong. 3. Must locate a mate to reproduce. Asexual reproduction also has its advantages like 1. It only need one parent to reproduce. 2. It requires less energy to reproduce. 3. It can reproduce quickly. However, asexual reproduction have its disadvantages too. The offspring are genetically similar and they are less able to survive environmental changes. They can easily be wiped out by the diseases, and because it reproduces very quickly, it can result to overcrowding of habitat. That ends my discussion on animal reproduction. If you learned from this video, please feel free to like and leave your comment below. You may also subscribe to this channel for more videos. Thank you.